What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Progressive Era Notes, Part 2. If you had not tuned into yesterday's note-taking assignment, I would highly encourage you to probably go start there first. Some of the things we talked about yesterday will tie into where we're picking up today. This should be a pretty short chunk of video notes, and then it'll correspond with the quiz that you're going to be taking after this. Again, just kind of as usual in my class, anything that's going to be on like the quizzes or eventually the quarter one exam will all come from my notes or any of the text reading that you were assigned to do. So I would start with the notes from yesterday. If you haven't already, hopefully you already got through those and you jotted down and added some stuff into your history notes. Then there was a Word doc that I had attached onto that assignment posting where there were some things that you had to go through and look at the text like PDF posting, where you could just go through and see text from our the normal book that I would use in class, where I have a classroom set of them, and you had to track down some answers there. Anything that was bullet pointed on there, the key vocab, that'll all go on the quiz today. So I'd recommend you get all that stuff done, jot it down in your notes, and then use your notes on the quiz. Okay, here we go. Yesterday we talked about the muckrakers. Muckrakers, remember that term is like originally it was a stable boy that was raking poop out of a barn, but that's not how we're using it in this class. Muckrakers were journalists that were exposing like evils and wrongdoing in society, like the bad, the mucky, nasty things out there. And there sure was a lot of rotten and kind of sometimes horrific stuff happening in American society back 100 years ago or so. There's a lot of different examples of muckraker journalists. Like today, we would think of them as a lot of times there might be a news commentator or a reporter. They might work for MSNBC or Fox or CNN. But back in those times, TV didn't exist yet. So anybody, if they were a journalist, they were probably working for a newspaper. Most people got their news and knew what was happening in the world by reading a local newspaper or maybe a bigger national one. So like the New York Times is still around today. That was a big newspaper back in that era. The Detroit Free Press, the Jackson Citizen Patriot. Now newspapers are kind of sort of going away and everything's moving to like online media. But back in the day, it was like, they didn't have internet yet. They didn't have TV. Radio was just starting to come around and be a new thing. So pretty much everybody, if you wanted to stay connected in the world, you were doing some reading, checking out your newspaper. Now, some of the muckraker journalists also wrote like books, short stories, and novels. One of the best examples of a muckraker journalist who was able to like see change happen in his lifetime, and really pretty soon after he did this piece of writing, was a guy named Upton Sinclair. So I'm going to minimize my face on the screen now a little bit, so you can see this slide. So Upton Sinclair, he's a good example of a muckraker journalist. There's probably, I'll give you some more examples as this unit goes on, but he's a good one that'll definitely be on the quiz and be on the exam. He worked for several different newspapers. He was also like a socialist, which we'll get into that term more in just a minute. But what he is most well known for was a novel that he wrote called The Jungle. Now, it has nothing to do with actually like being out in the jungle, hunting tigers or anything like that. Sometimes it gets confused with The Jungle Book, written by Rudyard Kipling. You guys probably have seen that movie. It was an old Disney cartoon, and then they had remade it recently. No, The Jungle Book and the book The Jungle are totally different things about totally different topics. So Upton Sinclair's The Jungle was a book that focused on socialism, political kind of philosophy and party that he was a part of, where he wanted the government to take more control of industries and corporations, go break up monopolies. He thought that would be a better approach to running the country. His intention with writing The Jungle was to win people over to socialism. However, the other thing, like his story is set where it's a poor Lithuanian immigrant that moves into this country, goes to Chicago, and is working in a meat packing plant where they're, butchering cows and hogs and making sausage and hamburger and that kind of stuff that'll go out to the public. The other thing he focused on in the book, in that context, was just horrific conditions in the meatpacking plants. There were no safety standards back then. There was no like health department that would come in and do inspections to make sure things were like up to code, because there were no government codes or anything to keep those places that were processing our food, safe and sanitary. So anyway, he always joked and said that he meant to shoot an arrow at America and hit us in our heart. And he was trying to give a really like sympathetic story of this immigrant's plight and all the horrible things he had to overcome. And he missed and shot America in the belly, because most people that read the book, they didn't focus much on the political aspect of it, but people were totally grossed out by the horrific conditions in the meatpacking plants, because most Americans eat meat, and they went to the supermarket to get their food or out to market, and they were just totally disgusted by the kind of things that were going on in these packing plants. I am going to read you an excerpt. Now, this isn't an original copy. On the screen there, and I'm highlighting it with my cursor, that was a first edition copy of The Jungle, kind of in the green, and you see the factory in the background. This is a later one, but I was able to get it from Miss Vandewater in the school library. And I want to read you a one-page excerpt out of this book, and it'll give you a good idea of kind of what I'm talking about and why it motivated so many people to call their politicians and demand that the government take some action. So here we go. It was only when the whole ham was spoiled that it came into the department of Elzabeta. That's the name of the immigrant who's the protagonist in the story. Cut up by the 2,000 revolution a minute flyers and mixed with a half ton of other meat. No odor that ever was in a ham could make any difference. There was never the least attention paid to what was cut up for sausage. There would come all the way back from Europe old sausage that had been rejected and that was moldy and white. It would be doused with borax and glycerin and dumped into hoppers and made all over again for home consumption. So pause there real quick. America, we have a lot of farms. We have a lot of farmland. We have a lot of livestock. We would export food to other places. Specifically, Europe was a big place that bought a lot of American products. So we would take meats like cured sausages and stuff, put them on a boat. They would ship over to Europe. Most of it would get sold, but sometimes down in the belly of the ship, they wouldn't sell everything, and the reject meat would sit down there. And then it would make the voyage back across the Atlantic and come back to like these packing plants. And once it would get unloaded and go back to the packing plant, you'd think they would take that old disgusting meat and just throw it away and discard it. But they didn't. They would douse it with borax and glycerin. Borax is like a kind of a harsh cleaning detergent. You can still get it at Meijer's today to do laundry and like disinfect your clothes. So they would just throw this disinfectant on the meat, and they would grind it back up again with fresh meat and send it out to for people to eat. Okay, picking back up there. There would be meat that had tumbled onto the floor in the dirt and sawdust where the workers had tramped and spit uncounted billions of consumption germs. Consumption is another way of saying tuberculosis. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip over it, and thousands of rats would race upon it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over the piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of dried dung of rats. So that means rat poop all over the meat. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, and then rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together. This is no fairy story and no joke. The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. There was no place for the men to wash their hands before they ate their dinner, and so they made a practice of washing them in the water that was to be ladled onto the sausage. There were the butt-ends of smoked meat and the scraps of corned beef and all the odds and ends of the waste of the plant that would be dumped into old barrels in the cellar and left there. Under the system of rigid economy which the packers enforced, there were some jobs that it only paid to do once in a long time, and among these was the cleaning out of the waste barrels. Every spring they did it, and in the barrels would be dirt and rust and old nails, stale water, and cartload after cartload of it would be taken up and dumped into the hoppers with fresh meat and sent out to the public's breakfast. Some of it they would they would mark as smoked sausage. But as the smoking took time and therefore was expensive, they would call upon their chemistry department to preserve it with borax, which you should not be putting on your meat, and color it with gelatin to make it brown, so it appeared like it had been smoked. All of their sausage came out of the same bowl, but when they came to wrap it, they would stamp some of it as special, and for that, they would charge an extra 2 cents a pound. So, rotten, gross, disgusting stuff. You could see why this would really make a lot of people upset and angry that are reading it, because there were no rules. The government didn't go in and do any enforcing. And these companies, if they were shady and unethical, they could get away with this stuff. And who knows how many people got sick? Who knows how many people died from eating these, the tainted, filthy meats that are coming out of these packing plants. So like rats getting ground up with it, the rat poop, they would put poison out. Obviously, you're not supposed to put like rat poison's arsenic. That shouldn't be getting mixed into the meat. Now, it's not like everybody that ate it would die. If you're a healthy person, you'd only have trace amounts of rat fur and all the other gross stuff in the arsenic. So it's probably not enough to kill a healthy person. But if you had a compromised immune system or weren't that healthy, I mean, man, it probably did take some people out. Throwing in all the old nasty water and the waste of the plant. I mean, it's just like, I can't believe they did that. And apparently he went and did some investigative reporting. So Upton Sinclair I'm talking about here, he, before writing this book, he basically went and applied at a meatpacking plant. He didn't go tell him he's a journalist looking to do a story and write a book on all the gross things they're doing. He went in and just posed as a worker, and he went and worked in one of these plants for a while and saw all this stuff playing out there. Apparently, he also saw things like with all of those grinders, the sausage grinders, and these really high revolution cutting mechanisms. He saw times where workers would have a finger cut off, and you'd think, a finger gets cut off and it's going into like the hamburger or the sausage. They would stop it and they'd discard that whole batch. I mean, that's what would happen today. That would be a big deal, and they'd get that guy to the hospital and stitch him up. I guess back then, these guys were, for the most part, all really poor immigrants that worked there. And if, they had a problem like that, they would probably get fired and lose their job if they complained about it too much. So apparently sometimes fingers would get ground up with it too. So you might get a little bit of a human finger in the sausage you're eating. So gross, horrific stuff, obviously. Most American people were not okay with this. They were really mad. They were outraged when they read this book. And within, I think it was about 6 months of this book coming out in 1906, Congress passed the Meat Inspection Act. So I'm going to highlight that with my cursor right there. That's a law. That's a good example of a change that actually happened. And that law is still on the books today, where it gives the government the authority to go in and randomly inspect these plants. So like today, you go buy some meat from Meijer's or Walmart or wherever you get it, the local meat market, A&A or Custom Meats. Now there's more safety standards, and they actually come in and inspect these places. And that all goes back to 100 and some years ago when this Meat Inspection Act got passed, and it led to better safety standards. Now we're going to talk about more examples of muckrakers and some of the laws that they got people fired up in arms about, and then people were writing letters to their congressmen and demanding something be done about it. But that's a pretty good example for us to start out with. All right. Clicking on, here's the other slide that I want you to check out today. And I'm just going to clear my face out of there for a second. So socialists and the labor movement grow. Now, I put these two things on the same slide because really, in a lot of ways, they're kind of intertwined together. Both socialists and the labor movement still exist, and they're still in America today. Like I said, Upton Sinclair was a muckraker journalist, but politically, he was also a socialist. He didn't really line up with the Republican or the Democratic Party. And really, most Republicans and Democrats are capitalists. They want to have a free market and let businesses kind of do what they want to do and go out and make profit. If you are a socialist, the best example I could give you of a socialist today in America would be Bernie Sanders. Even though Bernie Sanders ran as a Democrat and tried to get the Democratic nomination for president, although he lost out to Joe Biden, and then last cycle he narrowly lost out to Hillary Clinton. He actually has never registered as a Democrat until more recently. He was the one independent in our U.S. Senate for many years, and he says that he is just a self-proclaimed socialist, which is more like there's certain European countries that have that kind of system of government. But if you're a socialist like Bernie Sanders, he wants the government to have more ownership and say over private property and over like resources, or you could say like the means of production. So he wants way more government regulation on corporations and businesses. He wants to give the government more authority. And in a socialist state, a truly socialist state, the government like owns all the land. There really is no private property or anything that you would personally own. It would be all controlled and managed by the state, the government, and then people would use it, but like it's almost like you're kind of like renting it or borrowing it from the government, and everything is all about like doing what's best for the nation as a whole. We'll get more into socialism and communism down the road, but those two things, they've never really taken hold in America. Typically that's like almost like a bad or taboo word in American politics. Like if Donald Trump called Bernie Sanders a socialist a lot, and that wasn't because he's buddies with him, it was because he wanted Bernie to kind of get the nomination because he thought that would be an easy win for him, speaking from Trump's perspective, because majority of Americans are not socialists and they don't favor socialist policies. Now, over onto the labor movement. The labor movement is kind of another way of saying, or a fancier way of saying, like the unions. So the power of the labor movement grows tremendously in this time where, think of these meatpacking workers, how, their conditions are not that great. Those guys back at this time were not unionized. The auto workers like Henry Ford's plants were beginning to get unionized, and they were getting higher pay. They were getting safer work conditions, the 8-hour workday. So unions are starting to really catch on. And remember, a union is just where the workers band together. And like I told you, the three main goals of the unions were to fight for better pay, for generally shorter hours or an 8-hour workday, and better or safer work conditions. So anyway, the labor movement and socialism both kind of grow at the same time, and often they're kind of linked together. So we'll get more into those down the road. Okay, if you've done the notes from yesterday and you went and looked up the stuff out of the text and then taken some notes right here, you should be good to go for the quiz. Good luck. Once you get done with the quiz, you should see your score and make sure you submit it so it finalizes on Google and I see your score too. I'll get those loaded up first thing. Sorry, my dog's chiming in here. No, Cooper, stop barking. But that's all I have for you. So go take the quiz. Good luck with it. And you have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.